Today, then, I'm going to be talking about the spiral symbol and why I chose it for the name of this group, and the myriad of meanings that it has encoded into it. I've always loved the spiral anyway, because you probably know by now I am a Celtic girl at heart, and the symbol of the spiral is very dear to the Celts and is used a lot. So I've always loved the symbol, but I don't think I quite realised until I sat to meditate with it for this talk today just how amazing it is and how much information is encapsulated in there. It really is. It blew me away, as working with spirit always does. It always manages to do, no matter how many years you've been at it. So the spiral is obviously a naturally occurring symbol. So it is a pattern that exists in biology, in physics, in everything that's made up and exists in the world. So we will see it, for example, in shells, spiral shells, snail shells. We see it in plants. One of my particular favourites is the ferns. Before they unfurl, they're rolled up. I think they're called fiddleheads in folklore. Those are spirals. Now that we're exploring in space, and NASA posts their amazing photographs, you can see spiral galaxies. So out there we have the spiral shape. Our very own DNA is a spiral helix. So right down from the microscopic to the cosmically enormous, the spiral is existing. And as we know, nothing happens by coincidence. So there must be some meaning, some kind of underlying significance to this symbol. It's very, very ancient. I think, again, it's really hard to date specifically, but I think the earliest were found in the very earliest examples of rock art. So you'll see them inscribed on stones. And I think the latest guess is it's probably around 24,000 years old. They can't be sure, obviously. And it's also found all over the world. So as well as the famous Celtic ones I've mentioned, particularly probably the wonderful Newgrange burial mound tomb. There are lots of spirals there. And they also appear in double structures, two symbols together, and three, the triple spiral symbol, which is called the Triskele. But I'm going to be looking at the single one. There's enough information in there for today. So it's found all over the world. So over here in the Celtic countries, in Crete it's been found, in Malta it's inscribed on stones and temples there. What does it represent? Again, we don't know, because it existed long before there was writing and before anything was documented or written down. There have been guesses such as that it represents the sun, which you can kind of see, that it represents just the flow of life force energy. And if any of you have done Reiki with me, you'll notice that it is it has significance for our Reiki training. And also it's been connected to the divine feminine in some ways, and maybe I'll give you some clues about that later. So it's been linked to solar and lunar energies, and basically the cosmic wider scale of life. I mean, I believe that our ancestors, because they lived so close to nature, they will have seen the spiral in all their life around them. They will have seen it in the plant life. They will have seen it in stones, shells, all the things that they would pick up in their everyday life. But I also believe they could feel it because they lived so close to the land and they were so open to energies. I think it's an energy that can be felt. And in fact, I know this to be true because I work with land ley line energies and land energies, and I did a dowsing course at Avebury. And there is spiraling energy coming up from the earth, which has a very healing property. So these have now been dowsed, these spiral energies in the earth. And also when we talk about portals or energy vortices, they are three-dimensional spirals. So they are swirling columns of spiral energy, as indeed are our chakras. Our chakras spin, and in most diagrams, in a lot of diagrams, or as I present them when I'm teaching students any kind of healing, they have a kind of cone coming out of the front and the back through the spine, and they are swirling spirals, they are vortices. So this symbol, it's everywhere in life, energetic and biological, and it has significance. So to start with, if you picture the spiral in your mind, it's a dot in the center, and then there's a continuous line spiraling out, a continuous unbroken line spiraling out from that dot in the center. And I believe that this represents both our soul journey and our journey through life. So in the soul journey, to start with, we were all part of the one. I do believe this. We were all part of the source, and in order to grow and to learn and to feed back information to the divine who wanted to explore his creation, we separated out from source and went on a journey. And that's the point at which we start to come out in the spiral. And then the layers of the spiral going round that central point of our source, which is divine and continues to exist within us. So we then spiral around, with each spiral representing a lifetime. And then at the end of those lifetimes, when we have learnt everything we need to learn, and we no longer feel that we need to come back into a body, we travel backwards around the spiral and back to source, which we never left really, we were never really separate from, but we return to our origin. And in the same way, you could see that as the journey of conception too. So the dot in the center is our moment of conception. And then the spirals are the years, the decades that we spiral out through life, always expanding, always growing, always learning. So it's a really, and of course, obviously then at our physical death, we travel backwards on the spiral and back to source, or our body goes back to the earth. So you can see it as a cosmic soul journey, and you can see it as a bodily journey through the human experience. Now, you'll notice there are no straight lines on a spiral. As we've become more logic influenced and science has rather started to dominate our way of thinking, we kind of like straight lines. We like time to be linear. We like progress to be linear. We like always to be moving forward. But what the spiral tells us, and the proliferation of the symbol throughout the world, the universe, the cosmos that we live in tells us, is that living is not linear. It is cyclical. It moves in cycles. So there are equally balanced opposites here in everything. So you can expand outwards on the spiral, but you can also withdraw and move inwards on the spiral. It's a two-way thing. You don't have to go just forwards, which we do like to do, progress, growth. It's what our economy is built on. It's what our political system's built on. Growth, expansion, always bigger. And yet nature shows us the spiral is present, as I've already said, in biological matter everywhere. And nature shows us that cycles are just part of how life is. So we have a day, and then we cycle into night, and then we cycle back to day, and then we cycle back to night. We have the phases of the moon, which give us our months, which takes its name from the moon, obviously, the lunar cycle, the lunar spiral, if you like. We have light, we have dark, we have masculine, we have feminine. And what the spiral tells us is that these are not separate. The spiral has one unbroken line and it cycles around. There's no line down the middle saying one thing exists over here and one thing exists over here. It's free moving both ways, both expanding outwards and moving back inwards. And what this tells us is that we cycle naturally through all these aspects. We cycle through light aspects of ourselves and we cycle into dark aspects of ourselves. And they are not good or bad, they are part of the whole. So we need both. We need both. So we need to expand and sometimes we need to withdraw. We need to be in the light and sometimes we need to be in the dark. And so we shift and change. I'll explain a little bit more about how this can help us in our lives, but for now I'm trying to explain all the way the spiral holds these kind of images for us. So there's also oneness and unity encoded into the spiral. If you see yourself standing in the dot, in the center, I think I like the image of the CD. So when you put a CD on the machine, you'll see it's got grooves running all the way around, a bit like an old vinyl. I'm showing my age now, but like an old vinyl LP used to be. You've got different, a bit like a spiral, you've got different circles radiating out from the center. And while you can put the needle down and be playing one track on that CD, you know that simultaneously all the other tracks are there. You're just not playing them. And for me, the spiral shows that like whichever point you're at the spiral, or if you're right in the middle, those other realms, dimensions, songs, if you like, are playing at the same time. So from your position in the center, you can access all of those layers of the spiral. And they're kind of never ending. You can continue, if you had a big enough piece of paper, you could carry on drawing a spiral forever and ever. It would never stop. So it tells me that there are many layers of reality, dimensions, and times. So for me, the soul, the source of who you are, sits at the center. And then those spirals that spiral outward can be other lives, can be all the lifetimes that you've ever had. And if you can stay centered in that center spot, you have access to that information that's on those levels of spiral. It also means those concentric circles that kind of run out from the center of the spiral. You'll notice that you're always going to keep passing the same point occasionally. And this is how our soul works in lifetimes, because it can take us many lifetimes to master a particular lesson or something we've come to learn. And so as a reincarnating soul, in different lifetimes, you may bring a pattern back into that life with you to go round it again, because maybe you didn't learn how to manage that aspect of yourself fully, or you failed in your ability to recognize something that you wanted to be able to recognize. And so you'll find yourself coming round, cycling, repeating patterns in your lifetimes as a soul, as well as in an individual lifetime. You know how some people say, oh, this keeps happening to me? That is probably true, and it's because it's a pattern you're repeating, because you need to keep repeating it until you learn to recognize it, become conscious of it, and then be able to adapt so that you no longer repeat the same behavior. And sometimes that means we have to cycle round it a few times, as painful as that is. What hopefully happens, and what I find in a healing journey, is that you probably do cycle round it several times. I know I have. But each time you come back to it, you're a little bit more aware of it. you're a little bit more able to handle and manage and cope with it, and so it affects you less. That's where you're getting wider out of the spiral, so it's a little less ouchy because you've been around it once before, and then it comes up again and you're like, oh, here we go again. But then by the third time you're like, oh, I recognize this pattern now. I know what it is, and I know how I can change my behavior so that I don't get sucked into reacting in a certain way. So many layers of realities, times. Time is not linear. That's a human construct. Time, as nature shows us, is cyclical. Day, night, passing months, 365 degrees of the year as the earth turns. It's a cycle. So for me, it also shows that there are no dualities or separations. Like I say, there's not a line drawn down the center of the spiral. You just continue. It's like a dance. You move in and out of these energies as you circle around. And so you will move naturally through your life between feeling joyful and feeling sad, between being in the very best aspects of yourself, in the light, if you like to call it that, and then you will cycle down into the shadow for a little while, and the worst aspects of yourself will come out. And then you'll come back out and you'll be in the light. But because it's seen as a continuous movement, and I just love the thought of it being a dance with these energies, what happens is you start to see them as equally important, which is absolutely true. There's no good or bad, there's no right or wrong. You have to become comfortable with that cycling in and out of them. And they become accepted as a natural presence, a natural part of your life, and just included and seen as equal. So the other way I like to think about the spiral is, if you, again, taking the middle point, if you kind of pull upwards, you get like a vortex, if you like, or what we would call an energy portal, but you get a vortex which spins upwards. And that is the journey of your consciousness rising up to the highest level it can reach, which is basically unification with the divine consciousness. So part of our journey is to raise our consciousness and to spiral up to the awareness of the divine, and to access that wisdom and knowledge. But equally, if you're looking at the spiral laid flat on a table, if you were to push down on that center, you would have a downward spiraling vortex. So once you've raised your consciousness and become aware of that energy, the job then is to have that wisdom and knowledge come spiraling down, and to become fully embodied, to become fully present in the human form. So again, it's showing us that it's not a one-way street at all, the spiritual and human journey. We have to have both aspects of that. We have to be able to raise our consciousness above the normal level of humanity. But at the same time, we then need to be able to bring that consciousness down fully and embody it in our bodies and express it as a human in the world. And I think it's also, again, thinking of the chakras, which are those spirally energies, those vortexes of energies. Information, as I said, as we do, we can move both ways around the spiral. So we can move inwards to the center, and we can move outwards from the center. So the spiral also, to me, represents communication in terms of, particularly in terms of energy. So you will receive energy through the spiral, which will then come flowing down and into your center. And then you give out, project energy out through that spiraling energy as well, which will then ripple out and affect the people around you. So it's also about communication of energies, but giving and receiving. So the other thing I forgot to say, one of the natural instances, of course, of the spiral is the tornado, which is seen as destructive because it's chaotic. It is chaotic. it looks like a mad whirling dervish, actually, doesn't it? It almost looks like a dancer gone completely mad. And the thing is that once you get into cyclic energy, we see that as chaotic because, again, our logic and our science-based living, and sometimes just our security kicks in, and we just kind of want to know where we're going, and we want to make steady progress. And the thought of a spiral, cyclical energy, feels scary because there is chaos in there. There's an out of control element, but it's not out of control as in destructive. It's out of control as in allowing yourself to feel free to flow with these energies, again, to accept them all within you. And to move naturally between them, not judging them. As soon as you stop judging parts of yourself as good or bad and accept them, they integrate, they come together, and there's a freedom in that. And you're much more able to express your creativity and your joy and just the soul energy, if you like. So how do all these amazing aspects of the spiral help us in our journey? Well, one of the main ones is stay in the center point. The center point is the source of who you are. So that is your soul, which is connected to your spirit, which is a part of source and always does remain part of source. So if we can sit in the center of that spiral and stay strong and anchored there, it doesn't matter what's happening on the outer reaches of that spiral. It can be twisting and turning like that wild tornado, dancing in chaos. But we can just go with that chaos because we can hold this still, calm center. So we need to be able to sit at the center of that spiral. And that always reminds me of, if you know the Wheel of Fortune tarot card, it's got the same idea. There's a wheel spinning, and there's a center point at which not much movement is happening, and there is calm. It's like there's calm at the center of a tornado, isn't there? There's an empty space in the middle where nothing is getting ripped up or destroyed. And the Wheel of Fortune has that same idea. Hold your center, stay in the center, in your source, your heart, your womb, and your connection to the divine. And if you can do that, the more you can learn to do that, the more effectively you're able to do that, the less these cycles of change, which as humans we do find uncomfortable sometimes, the less they will affect you, the more easily you can move with them. So we're able then to cope with change because of that thing of it's a constant movement. Endings, including death, including physical death, is no longer a fear, because we know that the energy, it never ends. Like I said, there's no dead end on the spiral, there's no line down the middle. It continues to spiral out or to spiral in. And if it spirals in, the energy is just transformed and it spirals out again. So you begin to understand that with every ending or with every death, it's actually just a transformation. A new beginning, a rebirth will come. And there's tremendous comfort in that. And no matter how painful it is, and I know how painful it is to lose someone you love, but there's an underlying understanding that all that's happened is that the energy has been transformed and it continues on some level. Perhaps a spiral above you or below you, but there's not the panic of thinking that's the end of it and there'll be no more. You know that you're just going to cycle round. Day will come again, morning will break again after a long dark night. So the other thing is also, as I said, accepting that the opposites, all opposites, as being part of a whole. So they're not good or bad, they just need to be integrated and accepted. So you don't get stuck then. As soon as you start repressing a part of yourself because you label it as bad, for example, your shadow side, the dark side, I'm not a big fan of labeling things dark and light because, you know, there's good and bad. There's good and bad. It's so difficult to talk about this stuff, isn't it, without using words like that, because I don't like good or bad either, positive or negative. It's weird. It's very hard to talk about universal truths without It's like our language is not, it's just not expansive enough. But as long as you don't label things good or bad, as soon as you do label something bad, that you immediately start repressing it. I can't show that. I can't behave like that. I can't do that. And guess what? It starts to brew and ferment inside you, and then it will explode in the most inopportune moments that are going to cause a lot of damage both to you and probably anyone who happens to be around you at the time. So just learning and accepting that these aspects of you, the world is full of opposites, masculine, feminine, dark, light, day, night. And we just have to learn to dance with them and move in and out of them and see them as part of the whole. They are not good or bad. There just isn't such a thing. So you can then integrate, and you can allow yourself to move between them and just recognize it for what it is. It's like, oh, that's my shadow playing out now. But letting that energy still move through you in a conscious way, not an unconscious way, which is what happens when you try and repress any side of yourself. So the spiral is about embracing and accepting the whole of you and learning to move through those energies. And again, they don't stay around very long. It's like an emotion. It will pass through you and then it will be gone. And then, you know, you might spiral into another emotion further around the circle. But we can't stay in joy all the time, as great as it sounds, but we wouldn't recognize it as joy unless there was some sadness to weigh it against. So opposites, they are just part of the balance of life, and the sooner we can learn to integrate and accept them, the easier our life becomes. I'm not saying there won't be any pain, grief, sadness, of course there will, but it's just easier to cope with because we know that it's only transitory. We're just cycling around that spiral. And that fear of an ending, thinking like that really is the end of it, it's the sting. The sting has been removed from that fear because we know that we're just cycling around, and it's going to, whatever ending it is going to lead to a new beginning. So we can then also, if we use the lesson of the spiral, we can accommodate our own natural flow of energy. So the world wants to demand of us that we keep going on an expansive, outward, active spiral all the time. It's like, just keep going, keep achieving more, keep doing more. And that's the way to burnout and exhaustion. I mean, nature doesn't do that. We have the seasons, you know, that the world goes into hibernation during the winter to store its energy and to gather it up, collect it up, rest and sleep, so that in the spring there's an upsurge of fresh energy ready. It's been renewed, and we need the same. And so the spiral teaches us that yes, there will be times when we're expanding and active and we're moving outward into the world, but there are also times when we need to spiral inwards to that center, come into the center, rest, connect with yourself, dream, grieve. You know, we don't even give people time to grieve because we have this linear thing of keep going forward. And you know, you can't fully acknowledge pain and grief if you're still keeping going. It's a distraction. And so knowing where you are on the spiral, you can ask yourself, where am I on the spiral now? Do I feel like I need to be initiating new projects, getting myself out there in the world? Have I got lots of energy so I can be active? Or am I feeling really tired right now? Do I need to move backwards on the spiral? Do I need to rest in my center, nurture a new dream? Do I just need to be able to grieve the loss of a partner, a job, a home, someone I love, a relationship? So it allows us to follow our own energy instead of to keep being driven to move forward in a particular way. And again, knowing that that phase isn't going to last forever. It will last as long as it needs to, and you're going to come back out again and want to be active again. Healing also works in cycles. I've kind of hinted at this. So in your lifetime, you will find a pattern repeats. And when you know that, you can be much more compassionate with yourself. I mean, I used to get so annoyed with myself. I'd be like, I've spent years working on this pattern, and I thought I dealt with it, and there it is again. And I used to get really angry with myself and kind of tell myself off for doing it. And what happens now is I can see, because I'm going round that spiral. As I say, the spiral gets wider, the circle around that issue gets wider. And so you're a little bit more detached from it, you're a little more aware. And now I see it and I just go, hey, you again. Ha, there you go. I know what you are, and I'm not going to respond in that way again. So it really helps you to be compassionate with yourself and with others, of course, because it takes a while. It takes us a while to learn things sometimes, and we do have to go round it several times. And then the other thing is, really, the spiral tells us you never really get to the end. There is no end. It's just a transformation of energy. It's just a massive adventure. You can come in and out of this spiral as many times as you like. And when we leave this spiral, when we've repeated as many lifetimes as we need to learn everything we need to learn in this lifetime, and we're ready to return to source and carry on in spirit, I think there are more spirals in the other realms to travel up and down as well. So there's no end point to this journey. You're cycling outwards, you're cycling inwards, and I just find it really comforting and much easier to understand than a linear journey where you start from point A, you end at point B, and that's it. And I think it's helped to create that sort of scientific linear view of life, has helped to create many of the problems that we see in society now. The cyclical system of moving in and out of expansion and withdrawal, of being able to embody and accept all of the emotions that we spiral through, all of the aspects of ourselves, and integrate them, see them and love them as part of the whole, is so important.